Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire.in. On Saturday, the BJP government completes 4 years in power. So today we ask, what does the opposition make of those 4 years? Does the opposition accept that the government has some achievements to its credit? What sort of failures does the opposition point towards? And how does the opposition see the state of the country? Those are the key issues I shall raise today with former Home Minister and former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram. Mr. Chidambaram, before I come to a subject-wise assessment of the performance of the Modi government, let me begin by asking you for your overall assessment of its functioning over the last 4 years.
I ask myself a couple of questions. Has a country and the country's economy become more efficient, more productive, stronger? Answer is no, because I think there are serious issues affecting the economy, and I will write about it, for example, this Sunday. Has a country more friends in the neighborhood? Answer is no. Maldives, Sri Lanka, Nepal to a large extent, China, and not to speak of Pakistan, are not at all friendly. Within the country, are people happier, more cohesive, working with each other, respecting each other? The answer is a loud no. Never before, maybe during the partition, never before has a country been more polarized, more divided. People suspect each other and people hate each other. So I think the 4 years have not only not taken the country forward, may have set us back quite a bit in the damage done to the social fabric.
I'll come to each of those issues that you raised one by one in a moment's time. The economy, foreign relations, the social fabric, the mood of the country. But do you believe there are any successes that this government has achieved?
Any government in office for 4 or 5 years will build more roads, will complete more infrastructure projects which were started earlier, will build more toilets, will vaccinate more children, will ensure that more colleges are open.
But these aren't successes to boast of.
These are not successes. Any government will do it. And governments are voted out after they've done it. Did the Vajpayee government do nothing? But it was voted out.
What about the Prime Minister's performance as PM? How do you rate Mr. Modi's performance over the last 4 years?
See, Prime Minister is Prime Minister 24 hours a day. Whatever he does, wherever he is. The Prime Minister has not been prime ministerial. I don't want my Prime Minister going on a stage and waving his arms and flailing his arms and making gestures and mocking at people. I don't want my Prime Minister to speak like that. I hold as great examples presidents, prime ministers who have been presidents, prime ministers all 24 hours a day. Look at President Obama, a very recent example, always presidential. Even Putin is always presidential.
Mr. Modi is not always prime ministerial.
Look at his election speeches. Look at the language he uses. You can't turn around and say the opposition is using the same language. If the opposition is using similar language, that's wrong. But nobody in the opposition is speaking from the position of a prime minister.
In other words, there are standards you expect of a prime minister, and Mr. Modi simply doesn't live up to them.
Can you think of one example where Jawaharlal Nehru fell below the standard of being prime minister in all those 17 years?
How do you rate him amongst all the prime ministers India's had?
Well, we've had short-lived prime ministers, so I don't think they're comparable. We've had Chandrasekhar, Gujral, Charan Singh. I don't think you should really compare them.
But alongside Vajpayee, Indira Gandhi,
you can only compare him with prime ministers who have completed a full term. And prime ministers who have completed a full term are only Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi,
Vajpayee,
That's all.
But how does he compare with them?
Well, he's certainly not in the class of Jawaharlal Nehru or Indira Gandhi. And Rajiv Gandhi was a completely different breed. Vajpayee, even within his own party, I think Vajpayee was a greater human being, a greater humanist.
So Mr. Modi is bottom of the five.
Well, I don't say bottom of the five. I think in political craft, he perhaps was as clever as Mrs. Indira Gandhi, but Mrs. Indira Gandhi had much wider interests.
But in terms of dignity and stature?
Environment, literature, arts, I don't think the present Prime Minister has shown any interest in those areas.
And in terms of dignity and stature?
Well, I have a bias, and I'm biased in favor of Indira Gandhi.
Let's come at this point to a subject-wise assessment of the Modi government's performance, and let me start with the economy. This year, GDP is estimated to grow at 6.5%. I believe in the last quarter it touched 7.2. Inflation is 4.5. The fiscal deficit is 3.5. The current account deficit is 2. But FDI is at record levels, somewhere around 420 billion. And the Modi government is extremely proud of their macroeconomic handling. Do you think that pride is justified, or would you differ?
Not justified. Read my column this Sunday. It will be published, it will be online too. There are 12 areas where I've said the economy is in very dire straits. Well, I'll wait for you to read it. But let's take your FDI. FDI is to be broken into two parts. One is what I called additional incremental investment. The other is simply replacement capital. You're a foreigner, I'm an Indian. I own a pharmaceutical company. You buy me out. What you bring in is FDI. But for India, it's only one capital, one capitalist replaced by another capitalist, one capital replaced by another capital. It is not additional capital.
It's not fresh investment.
It's not fresh investment.
In a sense, that's what's happened to Flipkart.
Yes, most of these takeovers are not additional capital. It's just that one owner is replaced by another.
So to claim that this leads to record levels of FDI is misleading, to say the least.
It is misleading to some extent, except that it shores up our foreign exchange. We get more foreign exchange, but it is not additional capital that helps to build the country. It's one person being taken over by another.
So to boast about this is to actually misunderstand the nature of what's happening.
I have always said you must split FDI into fresh investment and replacement capital.
Let me touch on 2 or 3 issues to do with the economy. The first is farmers' distress. We've seen massive protests in March in Maharashtra. Starting the 1st of June, 110 farmers' organizations are promising to go on a 10-day Bharat Bandh. The Modi government response says that many of the concerns of farmers have been taken care of by their promise to give minimum procurement prices at 150% the production cost, as well as by the farm loan waivers various BJP governments have extended. Do you believe that the government's response is adequate to the distress farmers face, or is it way too little?
Who has given and who has got cost plus 50%? That's a promise. It's a jumla. It's not been implemented. The bulk of the farmers do not get even the current MSP. See, it's one thing to announce an MSP, it's one thing for every farmer to get it. Farmers don't get it because there are not enough mandis. You saw a report today, if you go to a mandi, there are not enough weighing scales. If you're asked to wait for 3-4 days, a farmer can't wait. So he sells. It is not a distress sale, it is a semi-distress sale. He sells it to a broker who then sells it for the MSP.
So the government's response to farmers' distress is inadequate,
in fact,
and misleading as well.
Dr. Ashok Gulati, in an article, and I suppose he's India's foremost agricultural economist, has said barely 25% of the farmers get MSP. They don't get MSP. Number one. And then this cost plus 50% has not been implemented at all.
And certainly not as the Subramaniam Committee intended it to be.
Certainly. I mean, it can't be implemented in the manner they have announced it unless they are prepared to subsidize something, because it will push up inflation straight away. As far as farm loan waiver is concerned, we have seen these horror cases where you get a check for 10 rupees and a check for 5 rupees. The only way a farm loan waiver can be implemented is by asking the bank to write it off on its books.
And that hasn't been done.
That has not been done, which is what I did in 2008.
So the BJP government's claim that they've adequately addressed farmers' distress is inaccurate, it's misleading, in a sense it's pulling the wool over people's eyes.
Well, another march is coming up, I'm told, very shortly.
That's right, it starts the 1st of June.
Yeah,
a 10-day Bharat Bandh organized by 110 agricultural organizations, starting Delhi and nationwide.
They're going to get out Delhi, and you see the number that will come.
And they're going to cut off the supply of vegetables to all the metros in the country. Let's come to a second issue to do with the economy. The BJP government during the campaign of 2013-14 promised to create 10 million jobs a year. Now, citing EPFO figures, the Vice Chairman of Niti Aayog has recently said that last year alone 6 million jobs were created. Surjit Bhalla, a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, has actually written that in fact 15 million jobs were created. But you know and I know that the Centre for Monitoring the Indian Economy has strenuously refuted this. Yeah. So in your opinion as a former finance minister, is job creation one of the successes of this government, or is it its Achilles heel?
There are not 15 million people entering the labor market seeking jobs every year, and yet someone says that 15 million jobs have been created.
So that's baloney.
It's complete baloney. I think that paper of the Ghoshas has been blown to pieces. Even the Ghoshas are not willing to come on a public platform to defend it. See, the only numbers we have is a Labour Surveys quarterly report. That's official. Every quarter, a few thousand jobs are created. The highest I've seen in a quarter is 136,000 jobs. In other quarters, I've seen much smaller numbers, but that's the only survey we have.
The government is choosing to rely instead on EPFO figures.
EPFO numbers doesn't mean that a job has been created.
Just formalized.
It only means a job has been formalized.
So once again, if you rely on EPFO figures, you could end up with an outcome that is distorted and wrong. And if you present it as reality, once again, you're fooling yourself, leave aside everyone else.
The best way is to ask the people. I was in Tuticorin, which is on the news for wrong reasons today, what we call Tutukudi. A huge public meeting. I mean, not necessarily party workers alone. The public were there. It's on the market, a regular public rally. And I asked the question, does anyone here know or can tell me whether his family member, son, nephew, whatever, a neighbor, a person in the same street, a family in the same neighborhood has in the last 6 months got a formal job? Will you please stand up and tell me a formal job?
And what happened?
Nobody rose.
Not a single
Not
person.
One. I've asked this in small groups. I asked this in Mumbai, in the Tata auditorium, in a session.
And again, no one stood up.
No one stood up. And now, they're not shy if their son or daughter has got a formal job.
But this is proof that jobs are not being created.
There are not enough formal jobs being created. There are replacement jobs. Somebody retires, somebody is appointed.
But that's a different thing. Let's bring up another issue. Again, a promise made by the Prime Minister when he was candidate in 2013-14, that he would institute wide-ranging, sweeping, radical reforms. In fact, at one point of time, he said the very face of the Indian economy would change. And when you speak to the government, they cite a whole list of things, from GST and demonetization to the Real Estate Regulation Act to the RBI's Monetary Policy Committee, Jan Dhan Yojana, Ujjwal Yojana, free LPG for people below the poverty line, health insurance, as well as a host of other things. But would you accept that perhaps 3 of the things they've done do constitute radical, wide-ranging reform? I'm talking of GST, I'm talking of the Investment and Bankruptcy Code, and then the decision announced in the budget this year that the fixed-term employment scheme, which many people believe is a backway entry for hire and fire, will be extended right across the economy. Are these 3 genuinely radical and far-reaching?
GST is indeed radical, but I don't think the BJP can claim credit for that. if anything the BJP can claim credit for is all the holes in the GST law, which they are filling now. Recall my speech in Parliament, and I cautioned them on a whole list of things. Don't do this, don't do this.
And they did them all.
They went and did all that, and now they're correcting it.
What about the other two?
Well, the other two is the
Investment and Bankruptcy Code?
Investment and Bankruptcy Code. This morning, there was an ordinance amending it. Well, I accept that trial and error. But why trial and error? Why can't you consult more people and put in place?
Think through what you're doing.
You look before you leap. The
Fixed term employment?
The fixed term employment is retrograde.
It's not hire and fire through the back door, which many people
More
want.
or less, it's retrograde. Can you suggest fixed term employment to auto workers in the United States? Steel workers in Germany or England?
But isn't this something industrialists have been asking for in India?
Precisely. Industrialists were asking for hire and fire. And as the government should stand up and say honestly, yes, we are trying to appease the industrialists by allowing hire and fire. See, fixed term employment is valid for certain kinds of jobs which are highly specialized, highly skilled jobs. Suppose you're employing somebody who brings in a behavioral scientist in your company or a human resource development specialist.
You only need him for a fixed term, hence it makes sense.
Yeah, and he may not want to stay with you for 30 years of his life.
But
anyway.
applying it across the board in India is misplaced.
Industrial workers, what happens to the Factories Act, the industrial laws, applying it across to people who need that job security and who probably will work for 30 years, like Tata Steel worker. I've seen Tata Steel worker spend his whole life there. I've seen people working in large textile companies for their whole life there. You can't introduce fixed term employment
So
there.
this is not a way of creating more employment, this is a way of creating insecurity of employment.
You see, I concede the principle of fixed term employment, but only for certain categories of jobs. Across the board, you must have regular employment with security of job.
My last issue to do with the economy before I turn to Kashmir, and that is to ask about demonetization. It is clearly the most controversial economic decision this government has taken in the last 5 years. But most people believe that litmus test to judge whether it's successful or not will be how much money is revealed to be black and how much of that then gets taxed and becomes a bonanza. Now the government has said that some 18 lakh, sometimes it's even spoken of figures in advance of 20 lakh, bank accounts are under scrutiny. Do you believe they will reveal vast sums of black money which will be taxed?
Under scrutiny means nothing. One thing is clear, all the money that was demonetized has come back to the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank does not even say anymore that it's still counting.
It's embarrassing.
Yeah, it can't say that. All the money has come back.
But will the money that's come back now be shown to be
No,
largely
let's
black?
take it one by one. Out of that, counterfeit currency is a minuscule percentage. So that objective failed. Less cash, it's failed because cash is back, and the government is in fact claiming cash is back now. We have remonetized the economy. The only question now is...
Terror funding has also failed because terror continues.
Yeah, terror continues and you find new crisp notes on terrorist bodies. The only thing that remains to be decided is, and the jury's out on that, is how much of this have you assessed to tax as if it was black money or undisclosed money. Let's wait to see the first results.
Do you fear that we could be waiting for years, even decades, because this could get tied up in horrible litigation?
Absolutely. There will be an assessment, there will be an appeal, there will be a further appeal to the tribunal, High Court.
So
Supreme
on
Court.
this particular critical issue, nothing can be said today at all.
Not at all. All other objectives failed on this question of catching black money, undisclosed money. Let's see.
Very quickly, how much damage do you think demonetization did to the economy? And secondly, connected with that, is that phase of damage over or is it continuing?
Well, the damage is over, but the pain is enduring. I'll tell you why. Small and medium enterprises have been severely damaged. Of these, many small units have closed down. I'll give you an example.
Which means jobs have been lost?
Yes. In Tirupur, which is the garment center, there is an area called Old Bus Stand. It's an old bus stand because there is a new bus stand now. But the old bus stand had 5,000 units which were doing job work for the garment units. 2 or 3 people employed, 4 or 5 people employed, sewing buttons, tassels, etc., etc. Of those 5,000 units today, 500 survive. It's there. You can go to Tirupur and see.
So a lot of jobs are lost, and these are jobs for people who will not find easy replacements.
Correct, because they don't have great skills. They have very narrow skills.
So the most vulnerable are the ones who've suffered the most.
And that is why new jobs are not being created, because 90% of jobs are created in the small and medium sector.
So this was the worst possible thing any government could have done in your assessment.
And the pain which the poor underwent, the daily worker, the vegetable vendor, the flower vendor, the carpenter, the tailor who had to work every day, the pain they underwent for 3 to 4 months. Who's going to compensate for them? They may have borrowed, they may have sold property. Who's going to compensate?
And now they've
that?
got their backs against the wall. Let's come at this point to another issue of concern at the moment, the situation in Kashmir. Since 2014, terrorist incidents have increased by 160%. The number of local Kashmiris joining terrorist organizations has doubled, and by some accounts it said 1 Kashmiri joins a terrorist organization every 3rd day, and the number of active militants has trebled. Against this background, how do you assess the government's Kashmir policy?
Completely wrong. Let me add a caveat here. The position that I have taken may not necessarily be my party's position. I have taken a position which is, I think, you can call it extreme, but I think that's absolutely necessary. Having said that, my party and I are on the same page that the Modi government's policy, the muscular, militaristic policy, has completely failed. It's bound to fail. This morning's report says, when the Home Minister called top police officials from all over the country, barring 1 or 2, unanimously they said, open talks with everyone, including the separatists.
And Pakistan.
And Pakistan. Now, this is what Dulat says, this is what the Kashmir police says, this is what army generals have said.
But this is what the government refuses to do.
They won't, because the government is only Mr. Modi.
So the government's Kashmir policy is totally wrong in your eyes.
Mr. Rajnath Singh may have different views, but he dare not express it. The only man that matters is Mr. Modi, and his policy is muscular military policy. We'll crush them.
In this context, how do you assess the Ramzan ceasefire announced on the 16th? Do you think it's a sensible move to reach out to alienated Kashmiris, or is it just too little too late, as well as inadequate in itself?
It's too little too late, but I still welcome it. Because I think it gives some credence to a completely discredited Mehbooba Mufti government. She may have gained, say, a point or 2 in credibility that she made a demand and the central government responded. Now she has to build on that. Whether she will build on that or whether we shall simply succumb to coalition pressures and go back to business as usual, I don't know.
Something else the government did, and they did it last year, was to appoint a special representative,
Where is he?
Dineshwar Sharma.
Nobody has heard of him or seen him in the last 6 months.
Well, he's refused to speak to Hurriyat, he's refused to speak to dissident or militant organizations, but it is reported in the papers that it was on his advice that charges against stone pelters was dropped, and it's also said that it was on his advice that the government agreed to the Ramzan ceasefire. So do you think he's delivered, or do you stand by your comment, he's invisible?
Absolutely. Last 6 months, I said it on the first day, but I'm willing to suspend judgment because I'm told he's a decent man. But in the last 6 months, nobody has heard or seen him. And I don't think the people in the valley care what he does or what he says. I think it's completely irrelevant now.
Something that's been increasingly noticed, it's been reported in the papers extensively over the last 9 months, is that today young Kashmiris, not just young boys, but often young girls, and often in their teens, have taken to throwing stones at security forces to prevent them arresting militants. And clearly, these young boys and girls in their teens show no fear of their life whatsoever. What does that tell you about the mood of Kashmiri youth today?
What it tells me is what a mother told a journalist. It was reported. It was, I mean, when I was Home Minister and our friend Omar was chief minister, we didn't hear such a statement. The mother said, when the child was on the street stone pelting and was in grave danger of being killed or injured, she said, I'm sorry, I can't stop my son because he thinks he's fighting for his future. When mothers say that they will not restrain their children, that tells you what the mood of the children is.
Have we lost the young in Kashmir emotionally?
I think so.
Is the situation beyond redemption?
Almost, I've said so, almost beyond redemption.
Do you believe that the BJP-PDP government cannot be part of the solution because it's part of the problem, and therefore the solution can only begin with the imposition of President's rule under Governor Vora?
Well, President's rule may not be a solution, but the problem at least will be removed. The PDP, BJP is the problem.
And it must go.
The PDP is seen as a betrayer and the BJP is seen as a usurper. When the betrayer and the usurper come together and form a government, it has zero credibility.
So the starting point to improve things is get rid of the present government. Let's come to a third issue of concern, India's relationships with its neighbors, and let's start with Pakistan, where I believe the relationship is arguably at its lowest ebb since Kashmir. Do you believe the government's policy that talks can't happen as long as there's the possibility of terror has utility and is still the right one, or do you think now the time has come to change the way you handle the situation?
See, I must preface it by saying Pakistan is equally to blame. I don't think anyone should go away with the impression that the government of India is to blame and the Pakistanis are blameless. They're as much to blame as the government of India, maybe more. But we have a greater stake in peace. We have a democratic government here, and the government must deliver in 5 years. The Pakistan, whatever government is there in Pakistan, is beholden to the army and they remain in office at the will of the army, be that as it may. So if I was in government, I would say, listen, I have a great stake in peace so that I can deliver in 5 years. If I must go the extra mile to ensure that things move on. So I think the government of India was completely wrong in adopting this blow hot, blow cold policy. I wrote once, they are capable of such somersaults which are worthy of an Olympic gymnast. One day you go to the nuptials of Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter, was it?
Granddaughter.
And the next day you say, there'll be no talks until the last gun ceases. I think both are foolish moves.
So the policy is confused and contradictory.
Absolutely.
So there's a definite need here for relooking, rethinking and changing.
We should announce that we are willing to talk to everybody. And then how the talk should be sequenced is a matter for the government to decide. But we must talk. Even when there is terror, you must talk. I mean...
So the policy, no talk while there's a possibility of terror, is a wrong policy.
It's completely wrong because terror will never cease. Has terror ceased in Afghanistan? Has terror ceased in Syria? Has terror ceased in the Middle East? Terror will never cease. Has terror ceased in Europe? Did terror cease in Ireland?
In fact, terror is one reason why you have to talk, not avoid talking.
Did it cease in Ireland? Did the last gun stop firing before they talked? It's only when you talk and reach a settlement that the guns will be silent. Even then, the guns will take some time to become silent.
A second troubled relationship at the moment is the relationship with China. Do you believe that the Wuhan summit was an imaginative way of restoring balance, or do you share the view of critics who say this is the latest of India's unwarranted concessions to Beijing and a sign not of strength but India's weakness?
You see, after Wuhan, is it? Wuhan. There was no joint statement. The two sides gave separate statements and they were very, very different. The points that were emphasized by India were not even referred to by China. So I don't know what the chemistry is, but one thing is clear, is one president, prime minister, the one chief executive of one country who refuses to be embraced or hugged by Mr. Modi. And that I think he makes it quite clear. Maybe they say it in advance. So what is the takeaway from Wuhan? I don't know. Because shortly after Wuhan, we get a report that China has started mining extensively on its side of the Arunachal border, and that it is a precursor to claim rest of Arunachal.
To be fair, you also got a report that China is putting pressure on Pakistan to send Hafiz Saeed to a West Asian
we
country.
heard that also. We heard that also. I think China is very clever, and China, see, the political situation, the structure in China enables them to shift gears very quickly, and nobody can question it.
So you don't think Wuhan is the right way of responding to this troubled relationship?
No. Wuhan, I'm not saying dismiss Wuhan. Informal contacts are good. Meetings on the sidelines are good. But eventually, you must list the half a dozen things that have to be addressed and sit down with the president of China for substantive talks and say, this is how progress will be measured over a period of time.
Informal summits can't take the place of the hard work of substantive talks.
And that must be left to diplomats. That must be left to trained foreign service officers.
The honest truth is it's not just relationships with Pakistan and China that are troubled at the moment. As you mentioned at the very beginning, we have a troubled relationship with Sri Lanka, with Nepal and the Maldives.
Yes.
And many people believe that the Doklam issue rankles with Bhutan, even though Bhutan doesn't talk about it.
Yes.
And yet there was enormous hope when Mr. Modi came to power in 2014. The heads of all the neighboring countries were invited. That was the moment of euphoria. What's gone wrong, in your opinion, since then?
Well, what's gone wrong is we want to consider ourselves equal to China. Now, that can be an aspiration.
But is this hubris on India's part?
I beg your pardon?
Is this hubris,
No.
false pride?
You see, China's economy is 5 times India's economy. Now, obviously, Mr. Modi is not to blame for that. We took different paths. Therefore, there is much to be done before China will even consider us as an equal. China thinks we are an upstart. We are not an upstart, but we are certainly not equal at the moment. Therefore, you will have to deal with China, which recognizes there's an inequality in the relationship in terms of power, influence, wealth, economic muscle, etc. There is a certain inequality there. But as far as the neighbors are concerned, I think this big brother attitude is what has brought us to this position. I think we have had great relationships with Sri Lanka, with Nepal, with Bhutan and Maldives. Every one of them is soured now. Bhutan's silence does not mean they are accepting all that we have done or not done.
And it's all because of
Bhutan's silence may actually be Bhutan sulking.
And it's all because of India's big brother attitude.
I think so.
Arrogance, actually.
Well, arrogance is a strong word. It's a big brother attitude. And I have a feeling, and I gather this from conversations here and there, that we are not allowing our foreign service, trained diplomats, trained foreign service officers to do the bulk of the work.
This is the second
It's
time.
being all done in the PMO.
This is the second time you've made this point.
Yes.
You fear
Yes.
that one of the problems with the conduct of foreign policy is that it's centralized around the office of the Prime Minister, and that trained expert foreign service officers are being excluded.
Absolutely. The External Affairs Minister is completely excluded. We know that. Completely excluded.
But Jaishankar, as Foreign Secretary, was said to be very close to the Prime Minister.
He was. But I think he worked more as a PMO person than as an MEA.
So he was co-opted.
I think so. He's very, very intelligent, of course.
We've talked about relationships that are souring and go wrong, and those are mainly the relationships of our neighbors. But there is one where most people believe, in fact, the relationship has flourished with Mr. Modi, the relationship with the United States. The American president frequently speaks in glowing terms about India, and that certainly brings a warm, happy smile to many Indian faces. How much credit do you give Mr. Modi for handling the relationship with Washington?
You see, I don't believe in embrace diplomacy. Just because the US president embraces you or hugs you or makes a statement, it means nothing. And certainly it means nothing when Mr. Trump says that. I want to know what is happening to our H-1B visas. I want to know what is happening to the green card holders who are waiting to get their citizenship. I want to know how many Indian students are being admitted to US universities and allowed to work after graduation.
And then there's pressure on any trade that India does with China and with Russia and Iran.
I want to know what are the trade disputes between India and US and how are they being resolved. For example, today we've imposed higher duties on a number of things, including armaments. Wait until tomorrow, the US will respond. So I think those are the things that matter.
And those are not being talked about, or worse still, they may even be ignored.
And there are disputes in the WTO between India and US.
So you're saying the image the press has of a very close, flourishing relationship could be contradicted by the actual reality in terms of the issues you've just mentioned.
The press here is only here to boost Mr. Modi's image. I don't think India's media, by and large, is truly independent of the Modi government.
You're saying the media behaves like a propaganda organ of the government at
Well,
times?
it's independent otherwise. I'm not saying but it is in fear of the Modi government.
It's in fear.
Yes.
In other words, it's servile and courtier-like in its attitude
I
to
can
the
give you
Modi
examples
government.
of editors being fired.
Go
An
ahead.
instance of the
Go
government.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, editor of a leading English paper was fired.
You mean the Hindustan Times?
Well, I won't take names. 24 hours. 3 editors of a leading business magazine were fired on the same day. There are at least 2 famous journalists who can't get contracts with any television channel. Editorials have been pulled out after they went online, but they didn't appear in the next morning's edition. Interviews have been pulled out after promos ran from 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yours to NDTV.
Therefore, what does it mean?
So you're saying, in a nutshell, that at a moment when the Indian media was needed to be objective, balanced, and properly assess the government, it's actually betrayed itself.
Well, those are strong words. I hope the media will discover its true character.
But it's let India down.
Yeah, by and large, the media is in fear of the Modi government. The media means the media owners are in fear of the Modi government.
Let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to talk to you about the internal situation in the country, the impact the Modi government has had over the last 4 years on critical constitutional institutions, the mood of the country, the treatment of Dalits and in particular Muslims. And finally, I want to raise with you a question that is often being asked, sometimes in the press, sometimes outside. Does Mr. Modi lack moral leadership, or is he just reluctant to show it? We'll be back in a moment's time for part 2 of this critical interview with Mr. Chidambaram. See you in a moment's time. Welcome back to part 2 of this exclusive interview with former Home Minister and former Finance Minister P. Chidambaram. In part 1, I spoke to him about the economy, about Kashmir, as well as about India's relations with its neighbours, and a little bit, of course, about the media. Now in part 2, I want to talk to him about the internal situation in the country. Mr. Chidambaram, let's come to the domestic situation. There are many people in the media and outside who believe that this government has undermined critical constitutional institutions. They talk about the cavalier way in which governments were dismissed in Arunachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. The judges are upset, the collegium in particular, about the fact that senior appointments to the Supreme Court are held up. The press talks about the politicization of the Election Commission or the politicization of investigative agencies. But the truth is, and you know this, exactly similar criticisms were made under Congress governments, particularly from Indira Gandhi's day onwards. So in this specific area, is the Modi government worse than any of its predecessors?
No, but how does it satisfy or how is it brings comfort to any young Indian boy or girl who's become an adult? To say these faults were there, these gross, egregious mistakes were there. How does it bring any comfort?
Two wrongs don't make a right.
We are talking about making this a better country for the next generation. Is the next generation interested in being told, we'll never be a better country, we were as bad 20 years ago? Is that an answer? That is no answer. Every new government comes and says, I will be better, I will make it better for you. Question is, has Mr. Modi made it better? That's the only question. There's no point comparing it with what happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
What's your answer to that question?
Which question?
Has Mr. Modi made it better?
Of course not. I'm a very worried person. Economy can be mended, set right. Relations with neighbors can be set right. But if the social fabric of this country is torn asunder, it lies in tatters today. It cannot be set right. Gandhiji could not set it right despite his long fast. He could not set it right and he died a bitter man. Can you and I set right if this country goes up in flames?
And you believe that there's a danger of that happening?
Today there is great anger among the Dalits, seething anger among the Dalits. There is mutual suspicion among Hindus and Muslims. Christians, you saw the Catholic Archbishop and the Catholic diocese beginning to speak up about their insecurities. The tribals are angry. Now, if a government cannot reassure the weakest sections of its people, what is the point of the government reassuring a middle class and the upper middle class? They anyway have their own resources to fall back upon. But what about these poor and weak sections?
In that context, let me ask you, do you fear that India is becoming a majoritarian, intolerant country, a country where nationalism trumps all the liberal principles of our constitution?
This government is majoritarian. It tries to impose majoritarian principles in as many institutions and places as possible. But I don't think the people of this country have yet turned majoritarian.
Is there a danger that the government is pushing in that direction and it could succeed?
Government is trying, but there is a pushback today. Middle class Hindus, educated Hindus walk up to me at airports, airport terminal, railway stations and tell me, why don't you guys do something, come back in 2019? And I joke and tell them, when you vote, we'll come back. If you don't vote, how will we come back? But there is a pushback. The Hindus are beginning to realize that this is a dangerous trend. You cannot alienate Muslims, Christians, Dalits, tribals, and yet call yourself a democratic, plural society.
Let's talk for a moment specifically about the manner in which Muslims and Dalits are being targeted, taunted and treated. I'm talking specifically about what happens to Muslims in Alwar or Kasganj or on a suburban train from Delhi to Faridabad. I'm talking about the fact that Dalits aren't allowed to wear moustaches, ride horses, or sometimes in Gujarat even participate in Dandiya festivals. How do you respond to this?
No, this is stoking the majoritarian ambition in the average person. Everybody wants to lord over someone else. I think one should stamp it out, not stoke it. What this government is doing is, it's stoking those ambitions, stoking those desires. And wherever it's possible, for example, what one or two people belonging to a community will not do, when 500 people join together, they do it. Ud Pelu Khan, he was there every day in that village, in that house, and I'm sure he had meat in his house on 3-4 times a week or even 10 times a month. But one or two people who passed by his house did not dare go in, drag him out and lynch him.
But a mob
did it. This is the point. You and I may be completely decent when we are walking alone. But if we are together in a group of 500 people, we may completely change character.
Let me quote to you some of the things in the last 4 months that BJP MLAs and BJP MPs have said about Muslims. A Rajasthan MLA said, the way the Muslim population is increasing, the existence of Hindus is in danger. A BJP MP said, Muslims got India divided. What is the need for them to live in India? They should either go to Pakistan or Bangladesh. What business have they being here? Do you fear that these aren't just prejudicial comments that people lacking in civility express, but this is a deliberate attempt to polarize the country?
It is. It is.
Is it succeeding?
Well, it did succeed. Muzaffarnagar, it succeeded, if you go by the results of the election next year, but it doesn't succeed always. It didn't succeed in Alwar.
But the government is trying, or MPs are trying to polarize the country.
To say government is trying may be not entirely accurate. Certainly the RSS and BJP, which run the government, are trying.
And this is deliberate.
Absolutely.
This is strategy.
This is the RSS's philosophy. Go back and read what the founders of RSS, the founding leaders of RSS, the first 2 or 3 leaders of RSS have written about their concept of Hindu Rashtra.
Let me put this to you. When atrocities happen on Dalits, Muslims or tribals, when horrible rapes happen, and we've had, God forbid, more than our fair share of them in the last couple of years, there's a lot of concern about the fact that the Prime Minister is silent. Or if he does speak out, it seems as if it's dragged out of him. The BJP, on the other hand, defends his silence on the grounds that there's no need for the Prime Minister to speak on every occasion. Now, the truth is that you were a member of a government where also the Prime Minister of the day, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was renowned for his silence. Is there any comparison between Manmohan Singh's silence and Narendra Modi's silence?
You see, I think Dr. Manmohan Singh may have been silent, but I don't think there was any occasion like Una or Unnao or Katwa where the Prime Minister did not speak. I don't know. You'll have to tell me whether there was an equivalent situation where the Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, did not condemn it. In the case of Mr. Narendra Modi, he lapses into silence for several days after the incident. And then when he refers to it not the incident, but he refers to it as part of something which he disapproves. He doesn't even name the incident, doesn't name the town, and doesn't condemn the people.
It's a glancing, indirect reference. Yes. Do you ever ask yourself the question, does Mr. Modi lack moral leadership, or is it simply that he's reluctant to exercise it? This is a question that's appeared in media commentary fairly frequently of late. Do you ask yourself that question?
Well, I don't know. I don't know, and I don't want to answer something which I don't know. I'm assuming that anyone who has the ambition to be Prime Minister has the desire to make a difference. Question is, what is that difference that he wishes to make? What is that difference that he wished to make when he sat on that chair? You can only glean it from his writings, speeches, behavior, etc. It seems to me that Mr. Modi is essentially an RSS man. And his ambition is that it's only when you establish a Hindu Rashtra, a government which is dominated and controlled by Hindus and imbued with the philosophy of the RSS, and all power is controlled in the central government, which is what their concept of Hindu Rashtra is. When that happens, everything else will fall in place. If that is the desire and ambition with which he became Prime Minister, I think that is pretty dangerous for this country.
The important thing is you understand Mr. Modi's speeches, actions, comments in line with the belief that he's out here to impose and create Hindu Rashtra.
Absolutely.
That's the only thing that gives logic to his behavior.
Absolutely. Look at every chief minister they've installed is a pracharak. Look at the person who is now projected as the chief campaigner of the BJP in any by-election. It's Yogi Adityanath. Look at every governor they've appointed. Dyed-in-the-wool RSS pracharak.
But you also appointed a series of governors who were congressmen, even congress ministers until just a few weeks earlier. Shivraj Patil is an example.
I'm not denying that. But then we're quite transparent about it. We knew who he was, what he did all his life.
Can I put this to you?
What do you know about the governors who they've appointed? Did you know anything about these governors before they were appointed?
Can I put this to you? There's a tremendous...
Even President Kovind, when he was governor, did you know anything about Mr. Kovind before he was appointed governor? And a couple of governors in Bengal and Tripura who make these outrageous statements from time to time. Did you know anything about their work before they were appointed governor?
I take your point. Often when people in the media or in conversation point to mistakes that governors are making or ham-handed or abusive power by the government, the BJP's response is to point out that much the same happened earlier with the Congress.
But I've answered that.
A recent example is what happened in Karnataka, the behavior of the governor and the way the BJP government of the centre was seen to be behind it. And no doubt, Vajabhai Valu was rightly criticised. The central government was rightly criticised. But the BJP's response, and there is some truth in it, and that's why I'm putting it to you, is to turn around and say, is this any worse than what Governor Ram Lal did to NTR or what Governor Jagmohan did to Farooq Abdullah? And many people say, unfortunately, there is an unhappy tradition in India of bad people being appointed governors, abusing their powers, and abusing the power to dismiss governments. Your governments have done it, they're doing it. How do you...
I've answered that. I'm an 18-year-old. I've finished my college or school or whatever. I'm stepping into this world. I'm not interested in knowing that what you are doing wrong is the same wrong that was done 20 years ago.
The past is the past.
I want you to tell me, what are you doing right? What will you do better? How will you make India better for me? That's what I'm interested.
In that context, let me put this to you. There is a view...
I just ask you a question. Do the Democrats and Republicans in America, every time there's some wrong committed by a Republican president, do they point out to a Democratic president 70 years ago who committed that wrong? What is this harking back to the past?
Whataboutery is very much an Indian way of conducting political discussions. Let me put this to you. There is a view that something that strengthens Mr. Modi's hand is that the face that heads the opposition to him is Rahul Gandhi. Many people believe that Mr. Gandhi hasn't got the qualities to be Prime Minister. Others perhaps are not impressed by him. How do you respond to the fact that there is this view that Mr. Gandhi, in a sense, is an insurance policy for Narendra Modi?
Well, only time and the people will tell. Today there is a ABP CSDA survey. The results have been published. Yes, Mr. Modi leads Mr. Gandhi by a few points. But Mr. Gandhi has gained, Mr. Modi has lost, is a takeaway from that survey. In terms of popular votes, the Congress UPA alliance or combination of parties will edge out the BJP NDA combination of parties. And if you add the BSP and SP and others, we will defeat the BJP NDA. That's what the CSDS survey says. Now, this may change after 3 months, this way or that way. But the point is, election is a year away. At that time, I've always believed that India's elections have become a collection of state elections. So it will depend upon how states vote. Quite rightly, in a federal country, it's the way states vote which matters. After all, Mr. Trump became president only because 3 states voted in a particular way.
Can I interrupt you at this point? Yeah. Mamata Banerjee has also said that the next elections should be considered and strategized state-wise. And in each state, the party that is the most powerful should fight 1-to-1 against the BJP. That is the best chance of A, enforcing opposition unity, and B, making it very difficult for Mr. Modi to win 272 again. In a sense, are you saying that you think along similar lines?
No, there is a difference. I believe that India's national election is a collection of state elections. There was a time when we had truly national elections. I think that came to an end in 1971 or so. After that, we have had a collection of state elections. And it will differ from state to state. And in every state, we must put together a formidable combination of parties that can take on the BJP. I think Ms. Banerjee, Mamtaji says 1-to-1. I don't think she means that every other party should withdraw from the election. It can't be one named party alone fighting the BJP.
But there should be an understanding between them how to split the seats.
Between the opponents about the seats. Now, I think it's possible to arrive at such an understanding in most of the states of India.
You showed strategic understanding and wisdom by allowing the JDS in Karnataka to play the lead role, to take the chief ministership, even though you have double the number. And that ensured not just opposition unity, but defeat of the BJP. Do you think Congress should adopt similar thinking
You see,
in other states?
In my calculation, Congress is the lead party in about 12 or 13 states where we will take on the BJP.
And where you're not?
I'm telling you. In fact, in some states, it's binary. The choice is binary. It's Congress or BJP.
Rajasthan, Madhya
Gujarat, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh. In 12 or 13 states, we are the lead party. But that doesn't mean the other parties will be ignored or should be ignored. They have to be given at least a token presence. But I think in 8 or 9 states, the Congress is not the lead party. We must allow the lead party to take the lead.
And Congress plays the subsidiary
And
role.
Congress must follow the leader there.
Which is what happened in Karnataka, in a sense, although you were the lead party.
Well, we were the lead party. We are the lead party in Karnataka. In terms of popular votes, we lead even over the BJP. But the circumstances are such that if you want to form a non-BJP government today, it can only be formed with the JDS becoming chief minister.
But you're also saying by association that where you're not the lead party, you should be happy to play a subsidiary role, because the important thing is to provide a united front to defeat the BJP, not allow your internal rivalries to give the BJP a let out.
Absolutely. And I think more and more people in the party are beginning to come around to that view.
Is this becoming the consensus view in the Congress party?
That's what I'm saying. More and more people are willing to accept the reality that while we are the lead party in 12 or 13 states and others must follow our lead, where we are not the lead party, we must allow that party to take the lead.
That's very clear, Mr. Chidambaram. Now, before I end the interview, I want to ask you 1 or 2 questions about yourself.
Well, nothing about myself, which is important.
Earlier this month, and this was in all the papers, the Income Tax Department announced that they were
I won't
filing...
answer. I decline to answer all those questions.
I just want to ask you one question.
No, I decline to answer
But
all
I
those
was
questions.
going to ask-
Irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. They've pursued a vendetta for 4 years. They'll pursue it for the remaining 12 months and I'll face
But
it.
when they suggest
I decline to
specific
answer
sums
questions.
that the properties they claim you haven't declared,
I don't think you should
Are they making it up?
waste your time asking this question. I decline to answer.
let me then put it like this. Are you being picked on and targeted because you're an opponent of the government and a particularly critical and outspoken one? Is this a vendetta?
It is. That's the only reason I can think of. There's no other reason.
In other words, these are false and
There are no other reasons.
So these are false and concocted cases brought by the Income Tax
You're
Department
wasting your time
or the
asking
ED.
more questions. I've never allowed the media to discuss a case. It's in your interest to discuss it in the media. It can only be discussed in a court of law.
I understand. Let me put it like this. If it is the case that these are false and concocted cases, doesn't that suggest that the same departments in your time or in the time of Congress governments was doing the opposite to your opponents?
Not at all. You can't point to a single case when I was finance minister where we had targeted anyone through a false case. Not a single case.
Maybe not when you were finance minister, but
I can
have
only
Congress
speak-
governments done
Well,
it?
again, you go back to that old thing which I said. I've answered it repeatedly.
My last
I
question.
can only speak for the period when I was finance minister.
My last question. Because there are so many cases that they are bringing up against you and your family, does it...
Again, you're wasting your time asking
I was
the
going to ask you this.
questions.
Does it worry you that some people, maybe many people, will conclude there's no smoke without fire?
You're wasting your time asking these questions. I will decline to answer every question of yours.
You're not worried that this could affect the way the public sees you?
You're wasting your time asking the question.
All right. I won't persist. Thank you very much for a comprehensive interview, for which I'm very grateful.
Okay, thank you.